An ordinary flight, a quiet little girl, and a secret that no one on board could have imagined. She looked like any other 11-year-old traveling alone. Sitting quietly by the window with colorful sneakers swinging beneath her seat, she spent the flight scribbling strange diagrams into a notebook while everyone around her ignored her. Some passengers even smiled, thinking she was just playing make-believe. Then, without warning, a deafening explosion ripped through the aircraft at 37,000 feet. The cabin shook so violently that people screamed. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling. Luggage rattled overhead. Parents grabbed their children, convinced their final moments had arrived. But while panic spread through the cabin, the little girl never screamed. She calmly unbuckled her seatbelt, looked toward the cockpit, and quietly said something that froze a veteran flight attendant in place. "I need to speak to the captain, right now." Minutes later, 2 elite fighter jets surrounded the crippled airliner. Then something happened that stunned everyone listening on the emergency radio. 2 highly trained fighter pilots, men with thousands of combat flight hours, stopped giving orders and began asking an 11-year-old girl for hers. Who was this child? How did she know things even experienced pilots didn't? And what was the mysterious call sign that instantly changed the way everyone spoke to her? Stay with me until the end, because this unbelievable story only gets more intense from here. But first, tell me in the comments which country you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories inspired by courage, intelligence, and impossible moments. It was a bright Sunday afternoon in early summer, and Flight 482 was preparing for a routine trip from Salt Lake City to Northern Virginia. Nearly every seat was occupied. Some passengers were finishing work on their laptops. Parents were trying to keep restless children entertained, and others had already settled in with headphones, hoping for a peaceful flight. Everything about the journey felt ordinary. Near the front of the cabin, in seat 7A, sat a young girl traveling alone. She couldn't have been older than 11. She wore bright blue sneakers that flashed whenever she tapped her feet against the floor. A pair of sky blue ribbons held her curly hair in neat ponytails, and an oversized hoodie with a space shuttle printed across the front almost swallowed her tiny frame. Around her neck hung the airline's yellow, unaccompanied minor badge, quietly reminding the crew that she was flying without her parents. A small navy backpack rested beneath the seat ahead of her. It wasn't filled with toys or coloring books like most children carried. Instead, it was covered with stickers from famous aerospace companies, aircraft museums, satellites, rockets, and military aviation exhibits. Right in the center was one sticker that caught a few curious glances as passengers boarded. It showed the silhouette of a fighter jet soaring through the clouds. Beneath it were 4 simple words: Future Wing Leader. The girl wasn't watching cartoons or playing games on a tablet. Instead, she was completely absorbed in a thick aviation handbook that looked far too advanced for someone her age. Beside the open book rested a notebook filled with perfectly drawn aircraft sketches, handwritten calculations, and neat diagrams of wings, engines, and airflow. Her pencil moved confidently across the page. She never paused to think. She wrote as if she already understood every complicated idea in front of her. The businessman seated beside her noticed the cover of the book and chuckled quietly. He adjusted his expensive watch, folded his newspaper, and smiled to himself. Kids have amazing imaginations these days, he thought. He assumed she had borrowed the book simply because airplanes looked exciting. Without saying another word, he buried himself in the day's headlines. A veteran flight attendant named Linda soon arrived for her final cabin check. With nearly 25 years of experience, she had cared for hundreds of children traveling alone. She knelt beside the girl's seat and smiled warmly. "Hello, sweetheart. First time flying by yourself?" The girl looked up and returned a polite smile. "No, ma'am. You doing okay?" "Yes, thank you. Everything's fine." Her voice was soft, calm. Exactly what anyone would expect from a quiet 6th-grade girl. Linda gently patted her shoulder before moving down the aisle to greet the next passengers. The little girl simply thanked her, picked up her pencil again, and returned to her notebook as though nothing else in the world mattered. No one nearby realized they were sitting beside someone extraordinary. To them, she was just another child flying home after visiting family. But hidden behind that shy smile was years of discipline, thousands of hours of learning, and a secret that would soon become the only reason nearly 200 people would make it home alive. Within the next 2 hours, everyone on that aircraft, from the passengers to the captain in the cockpit, would learn that first impressions can be dangerously wrong. The little girl's name was Emma Carter. She was only 11 years old, But there was a reason she seemed completely different from every other child on the plane. Most passengers only saw a quiet girl with a backpack and a notebook. They had no idea that her life had been shaped by one man who believed she could do extraordinary things. That man was her father, Colonel Daniel Carter, one of the Air Force's most respected tactical aviation instructors. For nearly 2 decades, he had flown some of the world's most advanced fighter aircraft, completing missions that remained classified long after they ended. Among fellow pilots, he had earned a reputation for staying calm under impossible pressure and solving problems that others couldn't. But no title meant more to him than one: Dad. Years earlier, Emma's mother had passed away after a sudden illness, leaving Daniel to raise his daughter alone. Many people expected military life to keep him distant. Instead, it brought them closer than ever. Every evening after work, instead of watching television or playing ordinary games, father and daughter would disappear into their garage. To outsiders, it looked like an ordinary workshop. Inside, it was something completely different. Daniel had slowly transformed the space into a realistic flight training room. Old cockpit panels, retired flight instruments, navigation displays, communication systems. Every spare dollar and every free weekend had gone into building it. It wasn't meant to teach Emma how to fly. It was meant to teach her how to think. When Emma was only 5, her father began with the basics. He would point toward the sky whenever an aircraft passed overhead. "What do you hear?" At first, she guessed randomly. But Daniel never gave her the answer. He taught her to listen carefully, to notice the difference between the deep rumble of cargo aircraft, the sharp whistle of fighter jets, the steady rhythm of passenger planes, and the unique sound of helicopters slicing through the air. Within a year, she could recognize hundreds of aircraft simply by their engine noise. When she turned 6, the lessons became more difficult. Her father introduced maps, weather charts, and radar screens. While other children were learning multiplication tables, Emma was learning how pilots tracked aircraft across busy skies and how controllers safely guided dozens of airplanes at once. She loved every lesson, not because she had to, because every answer only made her want to ask another question. By the age of 7, she was spending weekends inside the homemade simulator. It wasn't a toy. Every switch, every display, every warning light had a purpose. Her father programmed emergencies that real pilots hoped they would never experience. Engine failures, electrical fires, navigation system breakdowns, bird strikes, severe weather, hydraulic malfunctions. Whenever Emma solved one scenario, Daniel quietly made the next one even harder. Sometimes she failed. Sometimes she became frustrated enough to throw off the headset. But her father always smiled and said the same words: "Real pilots don't quit after one mistake." So she climbed back into the simulator. Again, and again, and again. Years passed. The practice slowly turned into instinct. By the time Emma celebrated her 10th birthday, she had spent hundreds of hours solving emergencies that many experienced pilots had only studied in manuals. Then, one rainy evening, everything changed. Colonel Carter created the most difficult simulation he had ever designed. Multiple system failures, limited controls, enemy aircraft blocking every escape route. A situation so complex that even several veteran pilots at his training unit had failed to solve it. He expected Emma to struggle. Instead, she quietly studied every instrument, closed her eyes for a few seconds, then began moving the controls with complete confidence. 4 minutes later, the impossible scenario was over. She had solved it, not with luck, not by guessing, but with a solution so simple, so creative, and so precise that Daniel replayed the simulation 3 separate times, convinced the computer had made a mistake. Each replay ended exactly the same way. Perfect success. For several long moments, he simply stood behind her in silence. Finally, he placed a hand on her shoulder. "I've spent my entire career teaching fighter pilots," he said softly. "I've never seen anyone solve a problem the way you just did." Emma looked up nervously. "Did I do something wrong?" Her father smiled. "No. You reminded me that even after everything falls apart, there's always a way to rise again." He reached into a small drawer beside the simulator and removed a metal aviation patch he had kept for years. Holding it in his hand, he looked straight into her eyes. "From today onward, you have your own call sign." Emma's heart skipped. Every military pilot dreamed of earning one. They weren't chosen. They were earned. Her father carefully attached the patch to her flight jacket. Across it, stitched in bright silver thread, was a single word: rising. No one else knows this name, he told her. And maybe no one ever will. But one day, when the moment truly matters, they'll understand exactly why you earned it. Emma smiled, hugged her father tightly, and never imagined that only a few months later, high above the clouds, that secret call sign would change the fate of an entire airplane. The aircraft had now been in the air for a little over an hour. Outside the windows, the endless farmland below stretched like a giant green and brown blanket beneath the afternoon sun. The sky was perfectly clear, and the captain had just switched off the seatbelt sign. Inside the cabin, life carried on as usual. A young couple laughed over vacation photos. An elderly man had fallen asleep with a travel pillow around his neck. Children, several rows behind Emma, argued over whose turn it was to play a game on a tablet. The businessman beside her had closed his newspaper and was typing away on his laptop, completely convinced this would be another boring flight. Everything looked perfectly normal, but Emma wasn't looking at the passengers anymore. Her pencil stopped moving. Her smile slowly disappeared. Something didn't feel right. It wasn't a loud sound. It wasn't even something most people could hear. It was a tiny vibration, a subtle tremor traveling through the cabin floor beneath her shoes. She quietly pressed one hand against the armrest, then another against the window. Her eyes narrowed. There it is, almost too small to notice. But it was there. Anyone else would have ignored it. Emma couldn't. Years of training had taught her something her father repeated hundreds of times. Your ears can lie. Your eyes can miss things. But an aircraft always tells you what's happening, if you know how to listen. She slowly glanced toward the wing outside her window. Nothing looked unusual. No smoke, no flames, no visible damage. Yet the vibration kept changing. Every few seconds, it grew slightly stronger. Her breathing slowed. Inside her mind, dozens of possibilities flashed one after another. Engine imbalance, compressor instability, fan blade damage, bearing failure. She wasn't guessing. She was eliminating possibilities. The businessman noticed her staring outside. He smiled without looking up from his laptop. Don't worry, he chuckled. Little bumps are completely normal. Emma looked at him politely. I know, but this isn't turbulence. He laughed softly. I'm sure everything's fine. Emma didn't argue. She simply looked back out the window. Then, she quietly checked the time on her watch. She counted silently. 5, 10, 20, 30. Her heartbeat never changed. Exactly 38 seconds later, B-O-O-O-O-M. A violent explosion ripped through the right side of the aircraft. The blast sounded like thunder exploding inside the cabin. The entire airplane lurched so hard that passengers were thrown sideways against their seatbelts. Overhead compartments burst open. Bags crashed into the aisle. Children screamed. Someone shouted a desperate prayer. A baby's cry echoed through the cabin. The aircraft suddenly rolled sharply before jerking back in the opposite direction. Then came another terrifying sound. Ping! 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 Oxygen masks dropped from every overhead panel. People reached for them in blind panic. Some froze. Others cried uncontrollably. Several passengers simply stared in disbelief, unable to move. The businessman beside Emma dropped his laptop onto the floor. His hands shook so badly that he couldn't even pull the oxygen mask over his face. His breathing became fast and uneven. I can't. Emma calmly picked up her own mask. She secured it over her face in one smooth motion. No panic, no hesitation. Every movement was controlled, exactly the way she'd practiced hundreds of times. Her eyes immediately shifted back toward the damaged wing. This time, she saw it. A section of the engine casing had been torn completely apart. Orange flames streamed behind the aircraft like a burning ribbon stretching across the sky. Pieces of metal had slammed into the wing. Tiny fragments continued flying away into the distance. Most passengers saw only fire. Emma saw something much worse: the damage pattern. Her father had taught her to never focus only on the obvious problem. The first failure is rarely the last. Look for what the failure breaks next. Her eyes tracked the impact marks across the wing, then toward the fuselage, then back again. Her stomach tightened. No, she whispered beneath the oxygen mask. This isn't just an engine failure. Her mind raced through the chain of events: high-speed debris, possible hydraulic lines, control system damage, pressure loss, multiple failures feeding into each other, a cascading emergency. She felt the aircraft yaw violently to one side. The pilots were already fighting to keep it straight. She could actually feel every correction through the floor beneath her feet. Left, right, too much, back again. The controls weren't responding normally anymore. Something else was failing. Something far more dangerous than the engine itself. Then the captain's voice finally came over the speakers. He tried to sound calm, but everyone could hear the strain behind every word. Ladies and gentlemen, we've experienced a serious mechanical failure. We've declared an emergency. Please remain seated. His voice paused for a brief moment. Our crew is doing everything possible. Emma closed her eyes for only a second. She already knew. The cockpit was running out of time, and unless someone acted quickly, this emergency was about to become far worse than anyone on board realized. For several long seconds, Emma remained perfectly still. Around her, the cabin had descended into complete chaos. Some passengers were crying openly. Others clutched one another, whispering prayers under trembling breaths. A flight attendant struggled to calm a frightened little boy whose oxygen mask had slipped off. The businessman beside Emma was staring out the window in horror, his face completely drained of color. Nobody noticed the young girl quietly studying the aircraft's every movement. Emma closed her eyes, not because she was afraid, but because she was listening. She could feel every vibration traveling through the cabin floor, every uneven correction, every delayed response from the control surfaces. The airplane wasn't simply losing an engine anymore. It was becoming harder to fly. Then she felt it. Another heavy roll. This one was slower, sluggish, as if the airplane wanted to respond, but couldn't. Her heart sank. The backup system. She opened her eyes immediately. "No," she whispered. "It's losing pressure." Inside her mind, years of training came flooding back. Her father had made her repeat one lesson more than any other. Engines keep an airplane moving. Hydraulics keep it alive. Without hydraulic pressure, the pilots would soon lose the powered assistance needed to move the aircraft's control surfaces. The yoke would become unbelievably heavy. Every turn, every climb, every descent would require enormous physical force. If the remaining pressure disappeared completely, landing the aircraft would become one of the hardest things a commercial pilot could ever face. Emma glanced toward the cockpit. They probably didn't know how quickly the pressure was dropping. Or maybe they knew and had no solution. She unbuckled her seatbelt. Click. The sound was tiny, yet it felt impossibly loud. Almost instantly, flight attendant Linda hurried down the aisle toward her. "Sweetheart," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "You need to stay seated! We're handling the emergency." Emma looked directly into her eyes. There wasn't even the smallest hint of panic, only quiet certainty. "I'm sorry," she said politely. "But I need you to take me to the cockpit." Linda blinked. For a moment, she thought she had misheard. "The cockpit?" "Yes. The pilots need help." Linda forced a reassuring smile. "I know you're scared, but they know exactly what they're doing." Emma gently shook her head. "No, they know they're losing hydraulic pressure, but they don't know how fast." Linda's smile disappeared. Emma continued speaking. Her words came slowly, clearly, like someone reading from a checklist. "The engine explosion probably damaged the primary hydraulic lines. They're flying on the backup system now, but the response delay keeps increasing. The controls are becoming heavier. If backup pressure reaches zero, they'll lose powered flight controls. Every correction will require manual force. If they overcorrect even once, the airplane could become impossible to stabilize." Linda stared at her. This wasn't something an 11-year-old should even understand. The little girl kept talking. Every sentence sounded calm, precise, professional. "They have only a few minutes before everything changes. We're already running out of time." The flight attendant swallowed hard. "Honey, how could you possibly know that?" Emma took a slow breath. "My father taught me. He spent years training military pilots, and he trained me too." Linda almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it sounded impossible. "You expect me to believe that an 11-year-old can help two airline captains?" Emma didn't answer immediately. Instead, she quietly reached into her backpack. She removed a worn notebook. Inside were pages upon pages of handwritten emergency procedures, aircraft system diagrams, hydraulic layouts, landing calculations, performance charts. Nothing looked like a school notebook. It looked like something belonging to an experienced aviation engineer. Linda slowly flipped through several pages. Every line was neat, detailed, accurate. Before she could speak again, the airplane suddenly lurched violently to the right. Passengers screamed. The cabin lights flickered. Several oxygen masks swung wildly from the ceiling. Emma grabbed the armrest to steady herself, then looked back at Linda. The backup pressure just dropped again. Her voice remained steady. "If we wait another minute, they may lose the airplane." Linda felt a chill run through her entire body. For 25 years, she had trusted instinct more than anything. And right now, every instinct she had was telling her one unbelievable thing. This child wasn't pretending. She actually knew exactly what she was talking about. With shaking hands, Linda picked up the cabin interphone. She pressed the call button. The cockpit answered almost immediately. The captain's exhausted voice came through the speaker. "Go ahead." Linda hesitated. She had no idea how to explain what she was about to say. "Captain, I know this is going to sound unbelievable, but there's a young passenger out here. She's 11 years old, and she says she knows exactly what's happening to the aircraft." Silence. Only static answered. Finally, the captain spoke again. "I'm a little busy right now." Linda took a deep breath. "Sir, before your last announcement, she told me the backup hydraulics were failing. 30 seconds later, your warning alarms activated." Another silence. This one much longer. Inside the cockpit, both pilots exchanged stunned glances. The captain slowly reached for the radio. His next words carried none of the irritation from before, only desperation. "Bring her." Linda looked down at Emma. The little girl had already picked up her notebook. She gave one small nod, then calmly started walking toward the cockpit. As frightened passengers watched her disappear down the aisle, none of them realized they were looking at the person who might be their last chance of getting home alive. The cockpit door swung open. Emma stepped inside. For a brief second, everything seemed to slow down. Rows of flashing warning lights painted the cockpit in shades of red and amber. Continuous alarm tones echoed through the cramped space. Every screen displayed emergency messages. The captain gripped the control column with both hands, his muscles visibly straining. The first officer worked frantically through emergency checklists, switching between radios and system displays faster than most people could follow. Both pilots looked over their shoulders. Standing in the doorway was an 11-year-old girl wearing a blue hoodie, flashing sneakers, and a yellow unaccompanied minor badge. The captain stared in disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me." Emma didn't react. She had no time. Her eyes immediately swept across every instrument panel. One glance. That was all she needed. Hydraulic pressure, flight controls, engine indications, electrical systems, fuel balance, control response. She mentally assembled the entire picture within seconds. Then she quietly spoke. "The primary hydraulic system is already gone." Both pilots froze. "The backup system has almost no usable pressure left." The damaged engine threw debris through the wing root. It didn't just destroy the engine. It damaged everything connected to it. The first officer looked at the hydraulic gauges. Her face turned pale. The readings matched exactly. Emma continued. "When the remaining pressure reaches zero, the flight controls won't stop working. They'll just become incredibly heavy. You'll still have control, but every movement will require far more strength. The biggest danger isn't losing the airplane. It's overcorrecting because the aircraft responds slower than your instincts expect." The captain slowly looked at her. "Who are you?" "My name is Emma Carter. My father is Colonel Daniel Carter. He trained fighter pilots for years. He trained me too. I've practiced emergencies like this hundreds of times." Silence filled the cockpit. Only warning alarms interrupted it. The captain searched her face. He expected fear. Instead, he saw absolute confidence. Not arrogance, not excitement, just calm. The kind of calm usually found only in people who had already accepted responsibility. Then, a loud warning horn exploded through the cockpit. BAP! The hydraulic pressure indicator dropped. 0. The control column suddenly became unbelievably stiff. The captain instinctively pulled. Nothing. He pulled harder. The aircraft barely responded. His breathing quickened. Oh no. The controls. They're locking up. Emma immediately leaned forward. No. They're not locked. They're manual now. Use your shoulders. Not just your arms. Pull steadily. Don't fight the airplane. Guide it. The captain planted both feet firmly against the floor. Every muscle in his back tightened. Slowly, very slowly. The nose of the aircraft responded. The first officer looked at Emma with complete disbelief. How did you know that would happen? Emma answered without taking her eyes off the instruments. My dad made me practice until panic wasn't an option. The cockpit became strangely quiet. Not because the alarms had stopped, but because everyone suddenly understood something. The little girl wasn't guessing. She understood the aircraft. Emma reached toward the communication panel. Captain. He nodded immediately. Without another question, without another doubt. She pressed the transmit button. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Flight 482. We have suffered catastrophic engine damage followed by total hydraulic failure. We require immediate priority handling. There was a short burst of static. Then air traffic control answered. Flight 482. Confirm the person transmitting. Emma replied clearly. My name is Emma Carter. I am assisting the flight crew. We need military support immediately. Another pause. Then the controller asked carefully, military support for what purpose? Emma looked outside the windshield before answering. Our pilots will have extremely limited aircraft control during the approach. I need 2 fighter aircraft to fly formation with us. They'll provide visual references during landing and relay our condition to emergency crews. The frequency went silent. Nobody spoke. Even the captain stared at her. It was an unusual request, one almost never made by a civilian. Finally, a different voice came over the radio, older, more authoritative. Flight 482. This is Regional Air Traffic Operations. Please identify yourself again. My name is Emma Carter. My father is Colonel Daniel Carter. I need you to contact him immediately. Another long silence followed. Inside the cockpit, nobody breathed. Then the controller spoke again. Stand by. We're verifying your information. Emma lowered the radio. She looked at both pilots. They're checking. The captain nodded slowly. He no longer questioned anything she said. Outside the windshield, the damaged aircraft continued descending through the afternoon sky. Inside, 3 people sat in the cockpit, 2 veteran airline pilots, and one 11-year-old girl quietly preparing for the hardest part of the flight. Because somewhere far away, a father was about to hear that his daughter was guiding a crippled passenger jet through one of the most dangerous emergencies imaginable. The next 30 seconds felt like an eternity. Inside the cockpit, no one spoke. The captain wrestled with the heavy control column, every movement demanding more strength than he had ever used in his entire career. Sweat dripped from his forehead as the damaged jet fought against every correction. The first officer stared at the navigation displays. Our descent is unstable. Emma leaned forward. Easy. Don't chase the airplane. Let it settle. Make one correction. Then wait. The aircraft is responding slower now. If you keep correcting too quickly, you'll create your own problem. The captain nodded without taking his eyes off the windshield. He trusted her. Completely. Then, the radio crackled. Flight 482. This is Air Traffic Operations. We've confirmed your father's identity. We're connecting him to this frequency now. Emma swallowed. For the first time since the emergency began, she felt her heart race. A second later, a familiar voice filled the cockpit. Emma. The entire cockpit froze.
her eyes instantly filled with tears. "Dad?" His voice sounded different than usual. Not like the calm instructor who spent years teaching her in the garage. Not like the decorated Air Force colonel respected by everyone around him. This was simply a father. "I've been told what's happening. Are you hurt?" Emma took a slow breath. "No. I'm okay. The crew is fighting the aircraft. We've lost hydraulic assistance." There was silence for just a moment. Then his tone completely changed. The father disappeared. The military officer took over. His voice became calm, focused, confident. "Copy." Then he spoke 4 words that stunned everyone listening. "Go ahead, Falcon." The captain slowly turned his head. The first officer did the same. "Falcon?" Emma had a military call sign. She pressed the transmit button. "Manual flight controls only. 1 engine lost. Aircraft stable for now. We're planning a long, straight-in approach." Her father listened carefully. When she finished, he answered immediately. "Excellent assessment. Stay ahead of the aircraft. Don't let the aircraft make your decisions. You make its decisions." Emma smiled. "Yes, sir." Her father continued. "I've already requested military support. They're on the way." Almost as if the words themselves had summoned them. The first officer suddenly pointed through the windshield. "Traffic!" 2 tiny shapes appeared on the horizon. Within seconds, they grew larger, fast, very fast. Gray silhouettes sliced through the afternoon sky before smoothly slowing beside the damaged passenger jet. 2 advanced fighter aircraft. One slid into position beside the left wing. The second matched speed on the opposite side. Passengers looking through the cabin windows gasped. Some even forgot they were in an emergency. The sight was breathtaking. 2 of the world's fastest combat aircraft were now escorting a crippled airliner through the sky. The lead fighter pilot transmitted. "Flight 482. This is Guardian 1. We have visual contact." "We're here to assist," Emma immediately answered. "Guardian 1. I need both aircraft to maintain visual formation. Monitor our wing alignment. Watch for any changes in aircraft attitude. And relay runway conditions from ahead." A brief silence followed. Then came a question. "Who's giving these instructions?" Emma answered without hesitation. "My name is Emma Carter. I'm assisting the flight crew." Another pause. Then the fighter pilot spoke again. His voice had completely changed. "Are you Colonel Carter's Falcon?" The captain looked at Emma again. She quietly replied, "Yes." Another short silence. Then the response came. Louder, sharper, filled with unmistakable respect. "Understood, Falcon. Guardian flight standing by. Awaiting your instructions." The first officer blinked. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. 2 elite fighter pilots, following directions from an 11-year-old girl. Her father returned on the radio. "Guardian flight. This is Colonel Daniel Carter. I confirm Falcon has my full confidence. Execute every request she gives." No one questioned him. "Copy that, Colonel. We'll follow Falcon's lead." Emma immediately shifted back into work. "Guardian 2, move half a mile farther right. I need a better visual reference during final approach. Guardian 1, stay slightly ahead. Call out any abnormal wing movement. Keep emergency crews updated every 60 seconds. Roger, Falcon. Moving now." Within moments, both fighters adjusted their positions perfectly. The captain watched in amazement. Every command she gave was executed instantly. Emma continued coordinating everyone at once. She spoke with air traffic control. She updated emergency responders. She verified weather conditions. She confirmed runway length. She checked the aircraft's descent profile. She coached the captain through every heavy control input. She even reassured the exhausted first officer whenever panic threatened to creep into her voice. For nearly 20 minutes, the cockpit became the center of an extraordinary operation. Air traffic controllers, emergency crews, military fighter pilots, a decorated Air Force colonel, and 2 veteran airline pilots, all working together. And somehow, the calmest person among them all was the 11-year-old girl sitting quietly behind the captain's seat. Outside, the runway was finally coming into view. The hardest part of the entire emergency was only minutes away. The runway was finally in sight. It stretched across the horizon like a narrow strip of hope, but no one in the cockpit relaxed. This was the most dangerous part of the entire flight. A damaged airplane with almost no hydraulic assistance, 1 working engine, hundreds of terrified souls on board, and only 1 chance to get it right. The control column had become so heavy that Captain Michael Hayes could barely move it. His uniform was soaked with sweat. His breathing was ragged. Every muscle in his shoulders and back burned from fighting the aircraft for nearly half an hour. Beside him, First Officer Rachel Brooks kept calling out numbers, her voice trembling despite every effort to remain calm. Altitude, 2,000 feet. Airspeed, 155 knots. Approach stable. Emma never looked away from the instruments. Good. Don't rush. Let the airplane come to you. The runway isn't moving. You have time. Outside the windshield, the 2 fighter jets glided effortlessly beside the crippled airliner, like silent guardians. Guardian 1 called over the radio. Falcon, your alignment is perfect. No visible structural movement. Winds are steady. You are exactly on center line. Emma answered immediately. Copy. Then she turned back toward the captain. Keep the nose exactly where it is. No sudden corrections. Small inputs. Smooth pressure. The airplane still wants to fly. You just have to help it. The captain nodded. I've got it. His hands tightened around the control column. 1,000 feet. The airport filled the windshield. Emergency vehicles lined both sides of the runway. Fire engines, rescue trucks, ambulances, police units. Dozens of flashing lights waited below. Every firefighter stood watching the approaching aircraft. Every paramedic silently hoped they wouldn't be needed. Inside the passenger cabin, no one spoke anymore. Parents held their children tightly. Hands remained clasped together in prayer. Several passengers had their eyes closed. Others stared out the windows at the fighter jets escorting them home. The businessman who had laughed at Emma earlier whispered to himself, Please, just let us make it. Back inside the cockpit, 500 feet. Rachel's voice cracked slightly. Emma remained completely focused. Captain, the flare has to begin earlier. The controls won't respond like normal. You'll think you're pulling enough. You won't be. You have to trust me. Captain Hayes swallowed. I trust you. 300 feet. Guardian 2 transmitted. Falcon, you're perfectly centered. No drift. Emma smiled slightly. Thank you. Then she leaned closer to the captain. When I tell you, pull with everything you've got. He nodded once. His arms were shaking from exhaustion. 100 feet. The runway rushed toward them. 50 feet. Emma's voice became stronger than ever. Captain, now. He pulled. Nothing. The nose barely moved. Rachel's eyes widened. It's not enough. Emma didn't panic. More. Don't stop. Use your shoulders. Use your back. Pull. The captain let out a roar as every muscle in his body strained against the massive resistance. The control column moved. Slowly. Painfully. But it moved. The aircraft's nose finally began to rise. Keep pulling. Don't quit. You've almost got it. The runway raced beneath them. For one terrifying second, it looked too late. Then, thud. The main landing gear slammed onto the runway. The entire aircraft bounced violently once. Gasps echoed through the cabin. The captain held the controls steady. Emma immediately shouted, Stay with it! No sharp corrections! Let it settle! The airplane dropped again. Boom! This time, all 3 landing gears locked firmly onto the runway. The remaining engine roared into reverse thrust. The captain stood on the brakes with every ounce of strength he had left. The damaged jet thundered down the runway. Smoke poured from the tires. Emergency vehicles accelerated alongside. The aircraft kept slowing, and slowing, until finally, silence. The airplane rolled to a complete stop. For 3 long seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The cockpit remained frozen. Then, the captain slowly released the control column. His exhausted hands were trembling uncontrollably. Rachel stared out the windshield. Her voice broke. We actually did it. Behind them, the passenger cabin suddenly erupted. Cheers exploded from every corner of the aircraft. People cried openly. Strangers hugged each other without saying a word. Some fell to their knees in relief. Others simply covered their faces, overwhelmed by the realization that they were still alive. The businessman who had once smiled at the little girl buried his face in his hands. Tears streamed down his cheeks. I judged her, he whispered. I thought she was just a child. Captain Hayes slowly turned around. Emma was quietly removing her headset. Her hands were steady. Her face was calm. The captain's eyes filled with tears. I've flown airplanes for 27 years, he said softly. I've handled storms, engine fires, medical emergencies. But today, he paused, struggling to find the words. Today, an 11-year-old girl saved every soul on this airplane. Emma gently shook her head. A small smile appeared on her face. No, Captain. You saved them. I just reminded you what you were capable of. For a moment, no one spoke. Outside, emergency crews surrounded the aircraft. Inside, nearly 200 people were alive because courage, preparation, and trust had come together when they were needed most. But the most emotional moment of the day was still waiting on the runway. The cabin doors remained closed for a few moments. No one wanted to move. Not because they couldn't, but because the reality of what had just happened was finally sinking in. Only minutes earlier, many of them had believed they would never see their families again. Now, they were alive. The silence lasted only a heartbeat. Then the entire aircraft erupted. Applause thundered through the cabin. People cried openly. Some laughed through their tears. Others reached across the aisle to hug complete strangers. A mother held her little boy so tightly he could barely breathe. An elderly couple clasped each other's hands without saying a word. The businessman sitting beside Emma slowly removed his glasses. His hands still trembled. He turned toward the empty seat where she had been sitting just 30 minutes earlier. The aviation book, the notebook filled with calculations, the small backpack. Everything was still there. Only now, they looked completely different. He lowered his head into his hands. I never even asked her name, he whispered. I thought she was pretending. I thought I knew what I was looking at. A tear rolled down his cheek. I've never been so wrong. Inside the cockpit, Captain Michael Hayes finally leaned back in his seat. The adrenaline was fading. His arms felt numb. He looked down at his hands. They were bruised from gripping the controls with every ounce of strength he had. Rachel slowly removed her headset. Neither pilot spoke. There simply weren't words big enough. Emma quietly stood from the jump seat. She picked up her notebook, smoothed the wrinkles in her hoodie, then smiled politely. May I go back now? The captain looked at her in disbelief. You still sound like this was just another day. Emma gave a small shrug. My dad always said, the emergency isn't over until everyone gets home. Captain Hayes stood up. His legs shook from exhaustion. Without saying another word, he wrapped Emma in the biggest hug he could manage. For several seconds, neither of them moved. You trusted us when we almost stopped trusting ourselves, he whispered. I'll never forget that. Emma smiled. You never gave up. That's why we're here. When the aircraft door finally opened, bright afternoon sunlight flooded into the cabin. Outside, the runway looked like a city of flashing lights. Fire engines, rescue trucks, airport security, medical teams, police vehicles, television helicopters circled overhead. Everyone had been waiting. As passengers slowly stepped onto the mobile stairs, many paused before walking away, not to take photographs, not to speak to reporters, but to find one little girl, one by one. People approached Emma. A father carrying his sleeping daughter knelt beside her. I get to take her home because of you. An elderly woman held both of Emma's hands. I've lived 76 years. Today was the first time I truly believed my life was over. Thank you for giving it back. A teenage boy removed the bracelet from his wrist. It reminds me to be brave. I think you deserve it more. Emma accepted it with a quiet smile. Thank you. Then, the sound of powerful jet engines echoed across the airport. Everyone turned. The two fighter aircraft that had escorted Flight 482 safely home taxied toward a secure section of the airfield. Airport workers stopped what they were doing. Emergency crews watched silently. The fighter jets rolled to a stop. Their canopies lifted. Two pilots climbed down, still wearing full flight gear, still carrying their helmets beneath one arm. They walked with purpose across the tarmac, straight toward Emma. Reporters raised their cameras. Passengers fell silent. The lead pilot stopped only a few feet away. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, not as a child, not as a passenger, but as someone who had earned his deepest respect. Then, he stood perfectly straight, raised his hand, and delivered a flawless military salute. The second pilot immediately did the same. Every conversation around them stopped. The lead pilot spoke loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Falcon, it was an honor to fly beside you today. You brought every one of those people home. Emma looked up at the two experienced aviators. Her eyes glistened. Slowly, she returned the salute with perfect precision. Thank you, gentlemen. I couldn't have done it without your help. The pilots exchanged a glance. Then the lead pilot smiled. No, he replied quietly. You gave the orders. We were simply proud to follow them. Just then, a dark military SUV sped across the restricted airfield. It stopped so suddenly that the tires squealed. Before the vehicle had completely settled, the rear door flew open. Colonel Daniel Carter stepped out. His uniform was still perfectly pressed, but his face told another story. For nearly an hour, he had listened helplessly over the emergency radio as his daughter faced a crisis no parent ever wants to imagine. Every instruction, every warning, every moment of silence between radio calls. He had lived through all of it. He walked quickly toward her, trying with every ounce of military discipline not to run. Emma saw him. For the first time since the engine exploded, the calm expression she'd worn throughout the emergency disappeared. Dad, her voice cracked. Daniel stopped only inches away. He looked at his daughter, the same little girl he had taught in a garage simulator, the same child who still loved cereal before school and soccer after class. But somehow, she looked older now. Not because time had passed, because responsibility had changed her. Without saying a single word, he dropped to one knee, opened his arms. Emma ran into them. She held on tighter than she ever had before. For the first time that day, she finally allowed herself to cry. Not quiet tears, not hidden tears. The kind that come only after carrying fear for far too long. Daniel gently held the back of her head. His own eyes filled. You don't have to be Falcon anymore, he whispered. You can just be my little girl. Emma nodded against his shoulder. I was scared, she admitted through tears. I was scared the whole time. Her father smiled softly. So was I. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. Being brave doesn't mean you never feel fear. It means fear never gets to decide what you do. Emma wiped her tears, then smiled. And all around them, passengers, pilots, firefighters, police officers, even hardened emergency responders, began applauding once again, not because they had witnessed a miracle, but because they had witnessed something even rarer, a father who believed in his daughter long before the world did, and a little girl who proved that courage has nothing to do with age. For the next several weeks, the story spread faster than anyone could have imagined. At first, it was only local news. Then national headlines picked it up. Within days, television networks around the world were replaying the incredible emergency. News anchors called it one of the most remarkable aviation survival stories in recent memory. Social media exploded with videos taken by passengers. One clip, recorded through a cabin window, showed the two fighter jets flying silently beside the damaged airliner during its final approach. Millions watched it. Millions shared it. But the video itself wasn't what captured people's hearts. It was the story behind it. A quiet, 11-year-old girl who had boarded the aircraft with nothing more than a backpack, a notebook, and a dream, and somehow became the calmest person in the sky when everyone else believed all hope was gone. The Aviation Authority immediately opened a detailed investigation. Experts spent weeks reviewing cockpit recordings, flight data, radio transmissions, maintenance reports, every decision made during the emergency. They expected to uncover mistakes. Instead, they found something astonishing. Every recommendation Emma had given matched established emergency flight principles. Every calculation she made had been remarkably accurate. Every instruction she offered helped increase the crew's chances of landing safely. Veteran investigators admitted they had never expected to write those conclusions about an 11-year-old civilian. One official quietly remarked, "Experience usually comes with age. But occasionally, talent arrives much earlier." Not everyone agreed with the unconventional training Emma had received. Some questioned whether any child should ever learn military aviation procedures. Others argued she should never have been allowed inside the cockpit during an active emergency. Those discussions continued for months. Colonel Daniel Carter listened to every criticism. He respected every concern. Then, during his only public interview, he answered with quiet honesty, "I understand why people ask those questions. I would ask them too. But on that day, my daughter didn't create the emergency. She responded to it. The crew made the final decisions. They flew the airplane. She simply gave them knowledge they didn't have. If teaching my daughter to think clearly under pressure helped bring nearly 200 people home, I'll never regret believing in her." Those words quickly spread across newspapers, television programs, and online articles. Many parents clipped the interview and kept it, not because it was about aviation, because it was about believing in your children. Captain Michael Hayes also gave only one interview. The veteran pilot had spent almost 3 decades flying commercial aircraft. Reporters expected him to talk about damaged engines, emergency procedures, or the difficult landing. Instead, he talked about Emma. "I've met thousands of people during my career. Some had impressive uniforms. Some had impressive titles. But courage doesn't wear a uniform." That little girl reminded all of us that wisdom can come from the person you least expect. I trusted her because she earned that trust. And if I were faced with the same situation tomorrow, I'd make exactly the same decision. The businessman who had sat beside Emma published a personal letter online. It wasn't about airplanes. It wasn't about emergencies. It was about judgment. He wrote, "When I first sat beside her, I saw only a child. I smiled politely and assumed she was pretending to understand the book she was reading. Hours later, that same child helped save my life. I realized something I'll never forget. The greatest mistake we make isn't underestimating someone's intelligence. It's believing we can measure another person's potential just by looking at them." His letter was shared millions of times. Teachers printed it for classrooms. Parents read it to their children. Its message reached far beyond aviation. 3 weeks later, life slowly returned to normal. Emma walked through the front doors of her middle school carrying the same backpack she'd taken on the flight. She wore ordinary jeans, comfortable sneakers, her favorite blue hoodie. Her friends rushed over, not because they saw a hero, because they saw Emma. One friend immediately asked, "So, are you still coming to soccer practice after school?" Emma laughed. "Of course." Another friend grinned. "I still beat you last time." "We'll see about that," Emma replied with a smile. Within minutes, they were talking about homework, summer vacations, science projects, and who had forgotten to study for Friday's quiz. Exactly the way 11-year-olds should. Emma loved that. Because although the world now knew her story, she never wanted the story to become her entire life. She was still a daughter, still a student, still a friend, still a kid who loved space, airplanes, and dreaming about the future. Late one evening, after homework was finished, Emma wandered back into the family garage. The homemade simulator sat exactly where it always had. Nothing had changed. The worn headset still rested on the seat. The instrument panel still glowed softly. Her father quietly walked in behind her. Neither of them spoke for several moments. Finally, Daniel smiled. "So, you ready for another lesson?" Emma laughed. "Seriously? We just survived all that. And you already want another lesson?" He folded his arms. "You know the rule." She rolled her eyes, already smiling because she knew exactly what he was about to say. A real pilot never stops learning. Emma climbed back into the simulator, adjusted the seat, placed both hands on the controls. Her father powered on the system. The familiar glow filled the room once again. Outside, the world knew her as the girl who had helped save an airplane. Inside that quiet garage, she was simply a daughter learning from the person who believed in her before anyone else ever did. One day she hoped to earn her wings for real. One day she would wear the uniform she had dreamed about since childhood. One day she would climb into the cockpit of an aircraft carrying not only her father's lessons, but also the confidence born from one unforgettable day above the clouds. Because extraordinary people are rarely created in a single moment. They are shaped by countless ordinary days, by patience, by discipline, by someone who refuses to stop believing in them. And sometimes, the smallest person in the room carries the greatest strength of all. If this story inspired you, remember this one simple truth. Never underestimate someone because of their age, appearance, or quiet nature. Greatness often hides where the world isn't looking. Thank you for watching. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes that courage, preparation, and determination can change lives. Until next time, stay safe and keep believing in the impossible.